Universal basic income. Some say it is money for nothing. Others say it is a payment for the collective achievements of humanity. Several thousand years of technology advances have improved our ability to create food and clothing. Shouldn't we all benefit from that? Our hunter-gatherer ancestors didn't pay to drink fresh water from a river or spring. Gatherers found food that was literally lying on the ground or, unlike money, growing on trees. 5 or so thousand years of progress and we pay for water and fresh food. In previous videos, we have looked at what UBI is, why some people think it is a good idea, why it might represent a better way to introduce money into the economy than the system we have at present, what level it should be at, and how we fund it. But let's suppose we have UBI. What then? What would that mean for taxes? What would it mean for the minimum wage? Opinions vary. One point of view suggests there will be no change.
My proposals are kind of neutral to the taxation system, i.e., they hold them ceteris paribus, they hold them as they are at the moment, and then stick in basic income. So I'm not really worried about the taxation system because I don't see taxation as being funding for UBI, you see.
I don't think public policy is about finding a magic wand. There isn't a single mechanism that's going to solve all your social problems, and you should not look for it. These are separate problems. I think one of the contributions that basic income can make is to stabilize expectations and, as I said, building capacity for contributions. And I also think in the long run that helps you to build your tax system in a fairer way. But of course, there are things about taxation, the challenges we face in the fiscal realm that have nothing to do with basic income directly, which are to do with how do we recapture resources from the new emerging economies, the platform economies and financial transactions and other areas of economic life, which frankly, we don't know where the money is.
Jeff Crocker, along with many others, have a view that a growing economy, which is seeing innovation, needs a growing money supply, or else there won't be enough money in the system to fund all those extra goods and services. In the past, the money supply could only grow if we found new gold mines. Today, the money supply grows by debt. When banks provide credit to households or businesses, they create money, which in turn can lead to credit bubbles. Supposing instead governments create money and use this to fund a universal basic income. Providing they don't create money at a faster rate than the productivity capacity of the economy grows, there shouldn't be inflation, at least in theory. If that view is right, then it might not be necessary to change taxation at all.
And the added value to a sovereign wealth tax is that it would reinforce this concept of the commons. So the common resources, belonging to everyone. So it's something that we all contribute to and we all equally get a share from.
Modern monetary theory also builds upon the ideas of printing money, although MMT does not tend to favour UBI, instead focuses on a jobs guarantee.
Tax is there to adjust the total aggregate demand in the economy in a Keynesian sense, to make sure that it doesn't exceed the economy's productive output. Therefore, tax is there to constrain against inflation. It's not there to fund government expenditure. So tax doesn't really matter to me in quite the same way.
Others see a new type of opportunity with UBI. We have a progressive taxation system, personal allowances, and rising income tax bands, all designed to ensure the richer pay more tax. The system isn't perfect and doesn't always work that way, but that's the idea. As proven continuously over the past 100 years, progressive taxation is complicated. And when something is complex, it is expensive to administer and can also result in uncertainty, which in turn can be bad for incentives. One suggestion is that we have UBI, we remove personal allowances and introduce a flat taxation system in which everyone pays the same percentage income tax rate.
Flat tax combined with UBI is actually very progressive. And if you combine that with good taxes on things like wealth or inheritance or capital gains or rentier income, and you can get a flat tax can be a part of a very highly progressive tax system. If you have a flat tax of 39%, get rid of all the tax deductions, you can have a UBI, according to Charles Clark's estimate, you can have that alone can fund a UBI at the poverty level. If you're then going to add taxes on rentier income, taxes on wealth, taxes on other things like that, all of that can reduce this 39% level. And that's also to fund everything the government is doing now. This is the US government, the world's highest military budget by far. If you cut those things, cut corporate giveaways, then that 39% can get lower and lower.
I am a proponent for a flat tax rate, while a lot of people would prefer a progressive taxation. I am a proponent of flat tax rates on income as long as wealth is taxed as well. Because if we look at all countries across the world, of course with differences, particularly between developed and developing countries, wealth inequality is much bigger than income inequality.
But it does depend on what level UBI is at. Equally, some say we can use UBI as an alternative to a tax credit.
And of course, the income system has two elements: the rate of taxes that you pay and the allowances or tax deductions and tax credits as we get them, as we call them in the United States. So the UBI can replace lots and lots of tax credits and tax allowances and tax deductions. And I think it should, because that's a very easy way to finance it. We don't need the people who are already getting massive tax deductions to get another $12,000 or $20,000 on top of that.
There is also a balance with taxation. Tax too much and dynamism can be sucked out of an economy. If UBI is funded by printing money, it might be necessary to play with taxes or interest rates as a way to keep a lid on inflation.
You know, if we start by holding all other fiscal policy fixed, then all the tax policies just stay the same, right? And we figure out what level of basic income the economy can handle. And then the question is, what kinds of taxes would we want? I think there are certain taxes that might free up resources. If resources are being used inefficiently in the economy, you can tax that resource, I guess, wastage. There are taxes that we might want that actually make resources more expensive, like perhaps a carbon tax, which would actually reduce the level of basic income we could sustain because it's making this resource more expensive and making the reducing the productive capacity of the economy.
This takes us to the idea of a minimum wage. If we have a UBI, the wage bargaining balance may shift slightly in favour of the employee. If you are desperate to work, you might take any wage and the employer is in the stronger bargaining position. A minimum wage exists to protect employees, allowing them to focus on their passion rather than their subsistence.
There is obviously less need for a minimum wage with a UBI because, I mean, the reason that we have a minimum wage is quite obvious, that we realize that we've put people in a situation where they need to get a job to survive. And they will work for just about any wage if that's what's available, because they really have no other choice. Amartya Sen talks about a man who went out looking for work during a riot and was killed. And he was willing to go out looking for work during a riot because his children were starving. That's what people will do. People will work, will do all sorts of humiliating, horrible things for money if you put them in the situation where they're going to be homeless and their children won't have enough to eat unless they work. So the minimum wage is recognition that people don't have this power, that we really do not have a free market.
I would say that minimum wage kind of falls into the category of using the labor market to push money to consumers, right? So if you think about people's time, everyone has 24 hours in a day, and they're spending that time doing something. And maybe you might want to pay someone some amount of money to spend some amount of their time doing something else. And that feels like something that's fine. If you're not forcing people to be dependent on jobs in general, if the normal way that people get their money is through basic income, then you don't really need to have these kind of minimum requirements on what counts as a legitimate job, that kind of thing.
The minimum wage can also support the economy. A higher minimum wage means workers have more money to spend. It is like the Henry Ford idea of increasing pay to workers, forcing competitors in the labour market to do the same, so that more people could afford his cars.
You say, well, you don't need a minimum wage if you've got a basic income that's high enough. I'm not sure, that this could be a belt and suspenders situation. You want to do two things to guarantee that wages are decent. But there's also an argument that if people have a fallback outside the labor market, they're going to be in a much stronger position to negotiate, and they'll know what's worth it to them to do. The idea of the minimum wage is that you don't allow employers to exploit poverty, right? But what if you just abolish poverty? Then you've solved the problem at its root rather than solving it later. Like, I'm not against a minimum wage, but a basic income is a better way of solving the problem of poverty.
This forces business to do better than just offer wage if they want to attract talent at the right level of pay. Treat people or the ecosystem poorly, and people would choose not to work at poorly run companies.
One of the best ways to improve the terms and conditions of employment at the bottom end of the wage structure is to introduce a basic income. I think that if people had the opportunity to walk away from low-paid jobs with poor working conditions, it would put a good deal of pressure on low-wage employers.
The UBI might also give employees and workers more options, perhaps for voluntary work or extremely low-paid work that they want to do, perhaps because it's what they enjoy or because it's a way to gain experience or learn.
In certain occupations, people might be really willing to suffer low wages, to live off their UBI because they want to break into the fashion industry or something like that.
But there is also the question of transition. Most advocates suggest phasing UBI in gradually, and during the transition, there might need to be a minimum wage and UBI.
This is another, everything is controversial about universal basic income. And personally, I do not usually take a stand on that, in the sense that I see the advantages and disadvantages of both sides of the argument. On the disadvantage point, I do understand that particularly in a moment of transition, where the whole labor market, the whole economy, and again, the whole psychosociology of people is transitioning. So you might create there might be gray areas, in which then employers might be able to take advantage. There might be loopholes and things. And also given the structure to current labor markets, which are highly precarious, I am not sure that, that universal basic income could completely replace that kind of security that minimum wages are playing now. But that said, I only think of minimum wages in a kind of transitionary phase, let's say 10 years, and then I do not honestly see the need for minimum wages.
So there we have it. The relationship between the taxation system and a universal basic income is complex. Using taxation to fund universal basic income is also complex, but doable. Tax supporters are confident that UBI can be funded through taxation, perhaps not the same taxation levers that we use today, but they nonetheless feel that tax is the solution. Alternatively, the call for printing more money to fund universal basic income is just as strong and presents a different set of macro level challenges. Managing inflation is a very real risk and would require the buy-in from other major economies to ease the transition period. But again, it's a solution rather than a barrier. Join us next time as we explore the guarantee of work argument and see how it might detract or support UBI.